Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I am Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson. And tonight we are going to talk about money, politics, and how to save our democracy because it's in shambles. Right. Just, a couple of little things, small topics, easy on a Thursday night, as if it hasn't been intense enough this week for us. We're going to try to save democracy tonight and all its problems. We have some great guests for you coming up. We have Judd Legum, who is the founder and author of Popular Information, a newsletter about politics and power. And he's going to talk to us about some of the corporations and the decisions they've made and who's funding those seditious senators and what's happened since the insurrection. And then a little bit later, we're going to talk to author and former Obama speechwriter David Litt about how we fix some of the problems in our democracy. He seems to think that it's not that hard. So we'll talk to him and ask him what he thinks. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And as always, we want to hear from you. Send us your tweets, ask your questions at #AskTheBreakdown. There it is, #AskTheBreakdown. And we will take some of your tweets and answer your questions throughout the show. So, Rick, the saga of this Marjorie Taylor Greene continues. And
it never ends.
I'm telling you, I just really wish this person would go away. And people have been critical and said, well, you guys are giving her too much airtime. You're giving her too much attention. And no one knew who she was. But no, this is a crazy person that has espoused some significant ilk against all types of folks. She's said racist stuff, anti-Semitic things. She said crazy things about Jewish laser beams from space, igniting wildfires in California. She didn't believe that the election was legitimate. She didn't believe 9/11 happened. I mean, this is a person who is completely unfit and unhinged. And the Republicans were given an opportunity to do something about it. They have the ability to strip committee assignments. They shouldn't have given her a committee assignment in the first place, but they did. And then all of these videos resurfaced. They were all out there. It was open sourced. It wasn't hard to find it. And then the pressure started. You have this Looney Tune in your caucus. What are you going to do about it? Well, Kevin McCarthy has decided that he has no balls.
That's
couldn't make a decision. Yes, that's correct. He had to face this Karen with a Q. What is he going to do about her? And he was given an option. Well, he dilly-dallied and I don't know what to do, and decided that he was going to give it back to the Democrats, right? The Democrats finally said, look, you need to make a decision. They gave him an ultimatum. You either kick her off the committees or we will. The full House will take a vote and kick her off the committees. So there was this whole big thing this week. Last night, for hours, she met with the caucus and with leadership, and the steering committee was trying to decide what was going to happen the other night. And then they finally had the vote on Liz Cheney. So you had Liz Cheney, who was under fire for standing up on principle and voted for impeachment. They were trying to kick her out of leadership. Then you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a QAnon kook. And guess who won out? What happened, Rick?
The weakness of Kevin McCarthy's leadership was completely evident. You had to have a secret ballot to preserve Liz Cheney, a conservative Republican of the oldest order. And they did that only grudgingly and fearfully. But they gave Marjorie Taylor Greene a standing ovation in the House. I don't know if you can make a comment that shows how much more collapsed and imploded the Republican Party that we used to know has become. But it is so obvious and so evident that when you have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, and the evidence is piling up, this isn't like 20 years ago or 10 years ago. This is a couple of weeks ago, some of these tweets, some of these statements. And the fact that she is now trying to come out and say, well, I was allowed to believe the wrong things, which is the most ungodly, passively constructed sentence I've ever heard. It's like Al Gore said that one time, there was no controlling legal authority. It's like
Right.
she tried to get away with it today. She has been stripped of her committee assignments by the majority of the House, and and by about 10 or 11 Republican votes, from what I could see.
11. Only 11,
Oh,
though,
is
Rick.
11? Okay.
That is
And
pathetic. I'm sorry. 11?
right,
Only
and
eleven?
it just shows you now that these people are on the floor voting. Okay. So last night, the Trump caucus was 61 votes against Liz Cheney.
Against Liz
Today,
Cheney.
all but 11 Republicans, because they know Donald Trump is watching. They know it's a
Yeah.
recorded vote. They know that Donald Trump will attack them, chastise them, go after them, and it is an amazing and terrible commentary about the GOP that they live in this level of fear all the time. You and I know this. We still talk to these guys, and that 61, that's probably the real number of like legit crazy Trumpers. The
Yes.
rest of them are either opportunists or cowards. And I don't like opportunists or cowards, but here we are, because that's what's left of their party.
You know, you're right. And we're going to show a clip of what Marjorie Taylor Greene tried to do today before the vote was taken. The vote was taken earlier this evening. 199 Republicans voted against stripping her of her committee assignments, and 230 230 members of the House, all the Democrats plus 11 Republicans, voted to kick her off these committees. So she's kicked off. But this was her version of an apology, contrition, I guess. Let's take a listen.
School shootings are absolutely real, and every child that is lost, those families mourn it. I also want to tell you 9/11 absolutely happened. I remember that day crying all day long watching it on the news. And it's a tragedy for anyone to say it didn't happen. And so that I definitely want to tell you, I do not believe that it's fake.
Okay, first of all, her floor speech was about 7 minutes. And if you want to suffer through it, you can go and find it and Google the whole thing. Why are we
Awful.
even here where a member of Congress has to reiterate that 9/11 was real and that school shootings weren't fake? Why? Because this lunatic said both of those things were not real. She accosted Parkland survivors, okay? So, and she questioned whether a plane actually hit the Pentagon. So you notice that she's been very clever with her words. She said that 9/11 was real. Oh, and she cried all day. Okay, sure she did. She didn't acknowledge, there are even 9/11 truthers who believe 9/11 happened. We all saw it happen. They believe that it was an inside job, though, that it was a conspiracy, that it was controlled blasts inside those buildings, not that it was terrorists who flew planes into the Pentagon and the World Trade Center. So she hasn't apologized for shit. Do not believe
Nope.
this woman's bullshit. She was not contrite. She has believed this conspiracy theory nonsense and espoused the stop the steal bullshit. She advocated to assassinate Nancy Pelosi and Democrats. She's done a lot of these things fairly recently. And she wants us all to believe now that she's been caught and threatened with losing her committee assignments, that all of a sudden she had a come to Jesus moment and she doesn't believe any of it anymore. Bullshit. So
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. This performance of hers today was so. I mean, and look, Terry, you know this better than I do. Congressional speeches are a very crafted product, and
correct.
what she had there today was the product of very good speechwriters trying to make a crazy person sound normal. And she recognized there were some red lines, but she also was still playing to her crowd. She was also still winking and nodding to the MAGA crazy, the QAnon crazy side of this of thing. And they knew that she was trying to just escape justice, just escape accountability, and so that they could later continue to own the libs. But you know what? You could tell that she was like, well, 9/11 happened, but fire cannot melt steel. You could see there was an edge there a couple of times where she really wanted to go. Obviously the Rothschilds had something to do with this. She's just there is something so nasty about her, something so twisted about her. And unfortunately, what everybody needs to understand, anytime you don't punish bad behavior, you get more of it.
That's worse.
So Kevin McCarthy completely crapped out on this. He sided with the QAnons, the lunatics, the conspiracists, the racists, the nutcases, the wackadoodles today. By defending her, he sent a very clear signal that what Donald Trump wants matters more than what's good for America, and that no one is crazy enough to be thrown out of the tent. Well, guess
Apparently.
what? People are crazy enough to be thrown out of the tent. She's crazy enough to be thrown out of the tent, but they didn't do it. And next, in 2022, there will be more QAnon candidates. There will be more conspiracy candidates. There will be more insane people running for office. Kevin McCarthy is already collapsed and failed as the Senate minority or the House minority leader. He has been replaced today by his capitulation essentially by Marjorie Taylor Greene. She runs the House GOP.
And if Democrats are smart, they will do what Republicans did and make her the face of the Republican Party. Her and Lauren Boebert and the other loons, they are now the Republican Party,
Brooks.
right? That's right. What did Republicans do for the last 2 years? It was all about AOC and the squad. They made every mailer, every fundraising pitch, commercials, everything was about, we're going to lose our country to these crazy socialists, AOC and the squad. Right. It didn't matter that they really had no power whatsoever. They were freshman members of Congress. Didn't matter. And that's what Democrats should do. The Republicans own this now. They are the QOP. They are not the GOP anymore. Nancy Pelosi had epic shade, and she sent a letter to Kevin McCarthy and put Q-CA instead of R next to his name. I love it. Keep it up. They've got to hammer that home because the Republicans own this now. They are sending a signal that this is who they are, this toxic, kooky, racist, lunatic conspiracy theory party that will be marginalized now for a generation. They had an opportunity to stomp this out, and they didn't. They own it. And Kevin McCarthy, trying to act like he doesn't know what QAnon is. Oh, the QAnon, like he didn't know what it was.
QAnon?
Nobody's buying it, right? Nobody's buying his BS either. Buddy, we saw you on tape.
He said it
before.
repeatedly in interviews that he knows what it is. He's lying.
All right. It would be political malpractice if you didn't know what QAnon was by now. Come on. Anyway,
random people in the grocery store know what QAnon is. Trust me.
Exactly. Unfortunately, my mom is 66 and she knows what QAnon is. I mean, stop it, Kevin McCarthy. You're the minority leader of the House of Representatives. You don't know what QAnon is. It's just all of it's just so phony. I can't even take it because he knows better, which makes it so frustrating. But the problem here is that now that they've decided to become the QOP, what are the corporations going to do? What are these people going to do with giving money? Which fits into the theme of our show tonight. And before we bring in our first guest, I think we have a video about this. Let's take a look.
These are uncertain times. Now more than ever, you want to have confidence that your investments are sound. You may have been wondering, what's going on with today's Republican Party? I just don't understand some of the moves they're making. Will my own brand's reputation be tarnished by some of the crazy things some members have been saying? No. We want you to know the GOP is a big tent, and while Liz Cheney is one seat in the back, the majority still stands by the values and priorities you've invested in all these years. Voter suppression, white supremacy, conservative judges, the elimination of all snake people pedophiles, tax cuts, and an end to the Jewish laser. Above all, the GOP stands for the return of God King Donald J. Trump to his throne and the toppling of rank democracy. Glory-soaked names like Hawley, Cruz, Gohmert, Boebert, Gates, and Taylor Greene are emblazoned at the center of today's dazzling Republican Valhalla. They embody today's Republican values, your values. With your continued investment, you'll help ensure they stay Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy values too. But we can only do it with your support.
They should take a cue from us, no pun intended. And
a cue, if you will.
A cue, yes, a cue from us, and constantly make fun of this. because it's real. The public needs to know. We cannot just, again, just move on and forget about what's going on. We have to hold them accountable and constantly remind them, just like Republicans relentlessly did to Democrats. We have to remind them this is what the party has become. They have no interest in governing. None. Marjorie Taylor Greene, and
None.
they have no interest. They want to raise money and be Twitter stars and kiss Donald Trump's fat ass. That's what they want to do. They have no interest in governing. So then we need to kick them out of Congress, vote them out, and put people in who actually have an interest in governing, not being reality show, social media warriors, keyboard commandos, and raising money off of it. And enough is enough with that.
Can I make one more point? One more loser in this whole affair this week was
Only
Matt
one?
Gaetz. Well, there's a lot of them, but he's particularly up there.
Matt Gaetz.
Matt went out to Wyoming, right? Matt went out to Wyoming with a nice, contour, and attempted to throw down on Liz Cheney, and utterly failed. And he went back yesterday, and I heard yesterday he was trying to whip votes against her, and hit a hard ceiling, and thought he had 70 votes. Ended up with 61 against her, which is very interesting because he was sort of the rising star, the golden boy of Trump world, and didn't work out quite like he thought. So,
Indeed.
Steve and I both worked for Dick Cheney in our youth, and all I could think of is if you walked into Dick Cheney and said Matt Gaetz said X, he'd look up and go, "Who the fuck is Matt Gaetz?" I don't do a great Cheney imitation, but it's close.
I'm sure. There's just no words for these fools. I just can't. Every day that I see this, it reinforces why I decided to leave the Republican Party, because this is a mess, and a mess of their own making, and they deserve all of the fallout from it, because they've had chances and they keep blowing it. And I don't know what it's going to take. A bloody insurrection didn't do it. A QAnon crazy didn't do it. I just don't know what it's going to take for them to course correct. Maybe a generation of being a minority regional party and never winning a national election again. I don't know. I mean, they were in the wilderness for 40 years in the House back in the 70s and 80s. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what it's going to take for these people. Before we bring in our next guest, Publix. We were talking about corporations. Publix is a supermarket chain down south. My parents had a house in the Florida Keys for many years. Publix was the only supermarket in town for like 20 miles. Like, I'd never heard of Publix. I made fun of the name when I first heard it, actually. And they had some controversy this week as well, because the heiress to the Publix fortune gave money to the rally on the day of January 6th, on Insurrection Day. And they're facing some criticism for this, rightfully so. And they're not the only ones that are this idea of corporations facing scrutiny for their political activity. But let's take a recap of the Publix.
Publix supermarkets is facing public backlash after the Wall Street Journal published a report over the weekend saying the heiress to the Publix supermarkets chain helped fund the Trump rally that preceded the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol.
Thank God a donor came in that paid for like 80% of it, because it cost close to $500,000.
That donor, according to the Wall Street Journal, is Julie Jenkins Fancelli.
Julie Jenkins Fancelli gave $300,000 toward the rally that cost $500,000 total.
This isn't the first time Fancelli and Publix have been in the spotlight for their donations. Publix donated $100,000 to Friends of Ron DeSantis.
Publix will soon become the sole distributor of COVID-19 vaccines.
Governor Ron DeSantis made the announcement during a news conference Tuesday afternoon.
The timing of it all raised eyebrows. The governor's office denies the vaccine deal with Publix was any sort of quid pro quo, telling us those claims were baseless and ridiculous.
Publix, though, is perfect because this is part of the community.
The governor of this state has 100% taken the ability to vaccinate our residents in Palm Beach County out of the hands of our public health officials and our medical officials, and given that authority to a corporate entity.
Oh, Publix, they're in trouble. Let's bring in tonight's first guest. Go ahead, Rick, before I bring in Judd.
As a Floridian, Publix is everywhere and everything. But there's a part of me that says it's not fair to smear them with her, but there's a part of me that just says, you know, that's part of the brand, and you bought the ticket, you take the ride. And they're certainly all in on Ron DeSantis and all in on a variety of other things that are due for consideration. So with that, let's welcome Judd
Yes.
Legum.
Yeah, let's bring
How are you,
Judd
man?
back in. He was peeking over there for a minute. Let me give him his proper introduction. Judd is the founder and author of Popular Information, a widely read newsletter that offers deep reporting into issues of power and politics. After the Capitol riot, he looked into the corporate donors who were backing the senators who objected to certifying the election results, and then contacted them to see what they had to say about it. Welcome to The Breakdown, Judd. We're happy to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
So
man.
your work is in line. It's in league with what we're also here trying to do with the idea of accountability across the board, politically, corporate, in the community. And you contacted a bunch of companies that changed their policies actually after the insurrection. We saw a long list of corporate entities that said, yeah, we're not going to give any PAC money to these members who didn't believe that the election was fair. Were there particular bad actors that you came across that Abe should be keeping an eye on?
Well, there's been a lot of companies that have moved. There's some that have really taken aggressive stands, like American Express stands out as a company that said, we're not going to give to the 147 Republicans, and we're not going to give to them ever. This is a permanent decision. There's other people who have said, a number of other companies, including some of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon, Walmart, Verizon, AT&T, who have said, we're not going to give to these 147 Republicans for a period of time. But we don't know how long that is or when they might start. So I think that's a good first step, but it's going to take continued vigilance to see if this is just trying to kick the can down the road. Then there's other companies, and Publix is one of them. Samsung is one of them. Southwest Airlines. There's a few dozen who have not said anything at all and are just trying to ride this out. And if you look at Publix, one issue is their donations to, this heiress who doesn't really work at Publix, but benefits from them and donated money to the riot itself. But also you look at Publix, how they do spend their money. And we took a look at this, and they've given, well over $100,000 to dozens of members who voted to overturn the election. And they're one of the companies that won't say anything at all. So, those are the companies that we're continuing to look at and trying to continue to try to get answers from. And now it's been weeks and we still haven't heard anything as far as what their future plans are.
So how much of this is a political calculus that Republicans are probably not going to be in power for some time, so they figure they can get away with this for right now? But do you think that this is really a result of just the pressure of the moment, or are they just waiting for people to stop paying attention and then they'll start kind of going back to that? Because we all know that money and politics go hand in hand. And these companies do this because they want favorable policies and regulations, and they want to influence these things that are favorable to their industries. So Publix probably isn't saying anything because Ron DeSantis is governor in Florida. That's a major market for them. He could make their lives miserable in Florida if he wanted to. And so they're just trying to ride it out. But I mean, how much of this do you think is really just in the moment now, or have they really made a shift? I'm skeptical.
I'm skeptical too. I think skepticism is healthy, but I do think it depends on whether or not the pressure is kept on. Because these companies, you have to realize, they didn't come and volunteer these statements. They gave statements because they were asked, and then when just a handful of companies initially responded, we initially contacted 144 companies. We only got 3 that committed to take any action whatsoever. It was Marriott, Commerce Bank, and Blue Cross Blue Shield. But those 3 put pressure on the next group of companies, and then that group of companies went to the next one, and now you have well over 150 companies who have taken some kind of action. And I think there are companies in that group who are just waiting to see if this blows over and would like nothing more than in 6 months or a year to continue donating to, Matt Gaetz and Andy Biggs and the whole crew. But I think if we stay on top of this and the public itself shows that they still care, they're not going to be able to go back to business as usual. So, that's sort of what I view. Part of my job is to make sure that I don't get bored of this, and that when the filings come out in 6 months, we probably won't see much of anything going on because they're all saying they're going to take a pause. But what about in a year from now when we start to see the end of year filings?
Right.
Just really
And the
vigilant.
midterms. And the midterms where it matters.
Yeah, and then you start to get into 2022, and that's when it's really going to be a real decision, because right now you don't really give that much money in the first quarter. There's no election until 2022. So, not giving money right now is not a big deal either for the companies or the candidates. It's whether this sticks.
Right. I mean, I think, Judd, that certainly is the sort of time. You're exactly right on the timeline. It is going to be a thing where this quarter they know they're being watched. Next quarter some of them are going to try to slip back in, and it really does depend in a lot of ways on whether Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy are going to be able to go out and hustle up and say to these corporate donors, listen, I need you to put your $1 million into the NRCC because I need to save this and this and this candidate. And these people there's no mechanism for them to say, you can help everybody but Marjorie Taylor Greene. They cannot, by law, earmark those donations to candidates. So if they give $1 to the NRCC, that's going to Marjorie Taylor Greene in some capacity, maybe only a penny or two, but it's going to go to her in some capacity. So we've got to be sure that to not let them off the hook. So they can't say, well, I just gave to so-and-so and so-and-so. No, that's not how it works. That money cannot be earmarked.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And of course, 2/3 of the caucus, voted to overturn the election. So it's not even just Marjorie Taylor Greene. If you've said as a company, you're not giving money to all the Republicans that voted against it, but then you turn around and you give money to the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee,
right.
2/3 of that money is going to go to people who you say you're not supporting. And then, of course, on the Senate side, Rick Scott was one of the people who voted to overturn this election, and he's the head of the Senate committee. So I think on both sides, they've got major problems. I think that's why you saw Kevin McCarthy go down and kiss the ring at Mar-a-Lago, because he's trying to come up with an alternative fundraising mechanism and hoping that Trump is going to turn over his list or whatever they're going to try to do.
That's exactly right, because Trump still controls the RNC's list. His people still run the RNC. He has control over that, and of course his campaign list was always all his property. So McCarthy knows, if I can't go out and hustle up 10, 20, $30 million from corporate America, I'm going to have to make it up by talking to the crazy people on Trump's list. And it really is an interesting box to put them in, because, look, there's about $300 million of corporate funding that goes into politics every cycle. You pull out $100 million of that from one side or the other, it's a game changer.
Yeah. And I don't think it's really Marjorie Taylor Greene. She'll probably be okay money-wise, because, she was raising money today. She's willing to stay and do anything to get those low-dollar donors. And, she filed impeachment against Biden on her first day at office or thereabouts. So she's going to be able to rile up the troops. But it's really hard to do that across, 200 incumbents. They're not all that exciting, and they're not going to all get the grassroots excited. And many of them rely 40, 50, 60% on these corporate PAC donations. And I think that's where there's going to be some vulnerabilities.
To your point, Judd, on the Marjorie Taylor Greene will be just fine fundraising, she's already raised almost $200,000 on this whole thing. by trying to be a martyr and claiming that she's the victim here. She's the victim. She's being silenced by the Democratic mob. And I mean, the doublespeak on this is insane. But yet she's raised almost $200,000 in 48 hours over this. And then she said, well, now that I'm kicked off the committees, that, she said this to the Washington Examiner, I can go do what I really want to do, which is continue speaking out and raising money. So she's wearing this, getting kicked off the committees with a badge of valor. Meanwhile, she's going to be a thorn in the side of the Republican caucus, of the people who aren't crazy. She's going to continue to be out there because she loves the attention, number one, and she's got the backing of these people who like to give the money and cause a lot of attention. I mean, they've got all kinds of ways to do that, and apparently right-wing media helping to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw after the election when Trump lost, and they knew they lost as they were doing this. But what they created was not really a political operation of any kind, but a fundraising operation. And they continued to send email after email after email raising. I think he has, tens of millions of dollars in his new leadership pack to basically use as a slush fund. And he has acclimated people to respond to these very extreme messages. So that's what Marjorie Taylor Greene is tapping into. There's a market for it. They're not necessarily hearing from Trump every day like they used to, and she's feeding that beast, and she's going to be rewarded for that. But I don't know if absent Trump, there's going to be enough to feed all of the Republicans in the House and the ones in the Senate that are up. And so that's why there's so many incumbents who looked to Publix, who looked to Home Depot, which actually was a real surprising one. They came out very late, but Home Depot says we're pausing. So we'll see what happens. Pausing the contributions to these 147 Republicans, which is probably as notable as any company, just because they are so ingrained as really a Republican conservative company, and they sell home improvement and construction goods. I mean, this is not someone who they're ready to go out and throw in with the Democrats. They're doing it because they realize just how toxic this is.
Right.
That's right. Money talks. We have a couple tweets for you, Judd, if you don't mind. Let's take them first.
I love tweets.
All right. I read that some GOP stated that the companies boycotting their PACs will not see favorable amendments on Democratic bills. Any truth to that? How are the companies reacting? Any truth to that,
Yeah,
Judge?
this is true. This was an extraordinary piece just a few days ago in the Wall Street Journal where they talked to different Republican offices who are being targeted by this essentially corporate suspension of donations. And they literally said, if these corporations don't give to us, we are not going to water down and kill bills and add their amendments like we're used to. I mean, they were literally describing a corrupt practice and that they won't continue these corrupt practices. And I was shocked to see it in print. But there's no one putting their name behind it right now. But these are legitimate reporters who came out, and I have every reason to trust that they're quoting these
Well,
staffers.
Steve Scalise came out and said.
So I do think that's true.
Steve Scalise came out and said they're going to need us soon. We're going to put them under pressure. They're going to need us soon.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's an extension of that threat. Which it also, none of us are naive around this. We know that politics and money are linked rather tightly. But there is a certain degree to which it's just so profoundly cynical by these guys. And they'll do anything to get their money back except alter the bad policies that make them profoundly unpopular with the American people or throw out the crazies.
Yeah. I mean, I think, they had an opportunity today with this vote with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I think that's going to be interesting because a lot of the companies have said, we're conducting a review. We're suspending, and in the meantime, we're conducting a review. So if you want to look at how did these 147 people conduct themselves since that day, and have they learned something from it? Well, I think you can look at the vote today. There were only 11 Republicans who voted to strip Marjorie Taylor Greene of her committee assignments. We're going to have another opportunity with the impeachment trial coming up next week to see how many people are willing to hold Trump accountable for inciting a riot at the Capitol. And it looks like from that initial vote on constitutionality that there's only going to be a handful, but we'll see. But that's another opportunity there. And I think corporations are going to have to answer for that if they start giving money back to these people who not only voted to overturn the election, but then subsequently showed that they don't regret that vote at all and are going to continue voting just right along those lines.
People don't change until they pay enough of a price. And until they start to feel that hurt, they're going to continue to do this. It's shocking to us that a loss of life at the Capitol, an insurrection happening, and all of these other things that seem to be obvious to us to be consequences, but that didn't move them. So I mean, I just don't know what it's going to take. I've been saying this repeatedly. I don't know. I mean, our democracy was already on life support, and that wasn't enough either. It's hard. It's shocking. Let's take one more tweet while we still have you. What about dark money funding these 147 kooks, Nazis, and cowards? Judd, explain what dark money is first, and then you can answer.
Yeah, well, you can give money through different kinds of organizations. 501c4 nonprofits are probably the most common vehicle for this, and it's not disclosed. And we saw this with the riot that happened, because there was an arm of the Republican Attorneys General Association, and they sent out robocalls to get a crowd at that event on the ellipse that ultimately marched to the Capitol. But they did it through a subsidiary of theirs that's a 501c4, which means the people who donated to that, we don't know who they are. And so, yes, that is a risk. I mean, that's a problem. I'm not going to be able to go into any kind of FEC database and find that out. But some of these other big players like super PACs, you do find out who gives money to those. So we will be able to track if a CEO gives $10 million to a super PAC, we'll be able to figure that out. But there are ways around this where the money stays effectively completely hidden unless somebody volunteers that they're doing. Sure. So that's a risk for sure.
Which is a good way to conclude the segment, as we want to make sure people read your newsletter. It's really, really well researched, well done. And what's unique about your newsletter is that you synthesize information and you break it down like we do here. You break it down in a way that makes sense to average people and how it applies to their lives. How do you think that is the way that you go about doing it is what we need right now, because so many people are so engaged in this political moment? What made you decide to start the newsletter?
Well, I do think that there's some gaps in news coverage. We've had thousands and thousands of journalists who've unfortunately been laid off because the news industry is struggling. And so there are these gaps, and there's not a lot of people. I like looking through these databases. I don't know what that says about me. I don't know, if there's something wrong with me, but I enjoy it. And I think but it's not that it's so dry. There's really powerful information there. And if you can take that and find the stuff that's meaningful and put it into political context, which is what I try to do. It's what I tried to do in this story about the corporations that funded these 147 Republicans. And it's what I'm going to do moving forward too. You give it political saliency. Then the people who read it, they really are the ones who take it from there. Walmart doesn't really care that much if I write something in a newsletter, but if I write something and a bunch of people read it and it takes off and people start retweeting it and contacting it and sending tweets and making phone calls and telling people how they feel, then these corporations start to get back. Then all of a sudden now they're returning my emails. And so that's really what's exciting about it, is that it's not just me sitting alone at a desk, although it is just me sitting alone at a desk a lot of time, but there's people on the other end, and the synergy between the two is what really creates something that's very powerful. And of course, the Lincoln Project, I think, taps into that same kind of energy where you're able to focus on a particular target or a particular person, and you can have an impact that way.
That's right. So just like
Well,
we're here to inform and to break it down so that the average folk out there can look and see what's going on and know what to do and act on it where they see fit. So be sure to check out Judd's popular information newsletter. There it is right there. Sign up for it. And Judd, we'll have you back. Thank you so much for the work you're doing.
you do great stuff, Judd. We really appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thanks for having me. This was great. Talk to you guys soon.
We'll see you again.
Yes, it's important to pick out the bad guys and the good guys too. He also talks about in his newsletter some of the corporate entities who are doing the right thing. He's got some information in there.
They're out there. They're out.
Of supermarkets, like Kroger did something that they shouldn't have done by closing stores to avoid paying workers more for COVID hazard pay, whereas Trader Joe's went ahead and paid not only their Seattle stores employees more money because it was mandated by the city. They went ahead and did it company wide. So I didn't know that until I looked at his newsletter. So it's the more you know, the better. So I think that's a good segue into our next guest tonight, David Litt. Hi, David.
Thank you for having me.
We cannot hear you. Well, I'm going to give you your proper introduction because not everyone knows you. We know you, but not everybody else does. So David is he's a former speechwriter for Obama. He's written several jokes. He was a joke writer for several White House Correspondents' dinner monologues, and he's also the author of Thanks Obama, My Hopey Changey White House Years, and of his most recent book, Democracy in One Book or Less, How It Works, Why It Doesn't, and Why Fixing It is Easier Than You Think. David, I've read your book, and I had the chance to interview you on my podcast over the summer, which was a hoot. And he's also a cat guy, so we like David.
I was about to say, yeah, mostly cat talk. That's I assume what we'll mostly be discussing tonight, but maybe right. Some democracy stuff.
We're about to bring a new LPTV show out of beta called Cat Talk, so that'll be happening.
Yes.
All right.
And now a million people are going to go, where's the cat show?
That's right. It's going to be Cat Talk, co-hosted by Tiki and Nameless. Oh my goodness. So David, I'm assuming that you heard some of our conversation with Judd talking about corporate responsibility and what they're doing and not doing and dark money and all of those things and exposing some of these people and what they're doing with their money. What do you talk a lot about bigger issues and fixes to democracy. And I think the transparency around money in politics and funding more broadly is something that we need to start refocusing on again. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the easiest way to think about all of this is for most of our lives, the basic question of can rich people or corporations spend as much money as they want on politics was essentially no. There were limits. And now the answer is essentially yes. There's still some rules, but because of the Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court, for about a decade, if I'm super rich, if I have billions and billions of dollars, I can spend as much as I want on political candidates and trying to get them elected. And the question then becomes, because the Supreme Court is not about to change its mind, and I think it's unlikely, and I think this is unfortunate, but I think it's unlikely that President Biden will expand the court or that the Democrats will expand the court. The question becomes, how can you raise the cost of spending unlimited amounts of money on politics? You're not going to be able to change the system entirely, at least not until the court changes. So you have to convince, a super wealthy would-be donor that instead of spending that money on politics, maybe they should buy another private jet, or maybe they should buy another house, or something else that is similarly expensive but might bring them more joy. And one of the things that transparency does is it essentially raises the cost of political donating. So it puts you in the arena. You can still give a lot of money away. You can give as much money as you want away, but you can't do it without any accountability. You have to answer for your decisions. You have to defend the candidates who you help fund. And that makes donating at that level just a little bit less attractive. So right now we're in a situation where when it comes to fixing campaign finance, there's only bad options. The best ways to do it have all been taken away from us by the Supreme Court, but that is one of the less good options.
When you say it's been taken away, because Citizens United case, right?
Yeah, Citizens United, and Citizens United, it's not so much a court case as a lifestyle, right? So like Citizens United was the tip of the iceberg. Before Citizens United, and this is diving a little bit into the weeds, but I think it's worth it. Before Citizens United, the court was balancing two different tests. So they were saying, on one hand, we the people have an interest in fighting corruption. On the other hand, Americans have the right to free speech, and campaign donations are part of free speech. And we have to balance those two interests. Citizens United basically said, never mind, we're going to throw out that old system because this fighting corruption thing is not actually an issue. The justices said not only will removing restrictions on campaign finance not lead to corruption, it won't even make people think that there's corruption. It won't lead to the appearance of corruption. And so after that, that was like the first, that was kind of the dam breaking. But then you've seen other campaign finance laws that have fallen after because of Citizens United. It set this precedent. And then, campaign finance opponents or campaign finance reform opponents brought other restrictions to court. And now with Citizens United in this new era, they're no longer constitutional. So that's been the kind of Citizens United era that we're living in. It's not just the court case, it's everything that's come after it too.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, all the iteration, when McCain-Feingold was passed, there were a million warnings that this was setting up a bunch of terrible court decisions in the future. And Citizens was exactly the outcome. A lot of skeptics about the constitutionality of McCain-Feingold kept bringing up. And when Citizens happened, it was so much worse than they ever expected in terms of disconnecting any sort of regulatory function to campaign donations. They unfortunately got their wish with McCain-Feingold, which led to something that exacerbated the problem well beyond what anybody, but between 1974 and McCain-Feingold, we had a kind of messy and broken system. But after McCain-Feingold led to all these court decisions, it was like a nuclear bomb going off. The money's out there in a very free-for-all environment. And I've always looked at it, David, as a market guy. What we're doing at the Lincoln Project by raising the market costs of investing in bad people is applying free market principles to political speech. And it's sort of a new space to be in, but we've seen it working now the last few months as we've started to bring pressure on these people. But I do agree there has to be at some point, we've got to come to some sort of national agreement on what the scope and scale of campaign finance is going to look like in the future, because it's not as radically democratized as people think just because there are a lot of small givers.
Yeah, the small dollar donations are helpful, no question. If you look at what some candidates have been able to do, but the way I think about this is, the question kind of ends up becoming, what qualities do we look for in a politically powerful person who hasn't been elected to office, or what kind of candidates end up becoming viable and having a real shot at political office? So right now, there's two really good ways to raise money. You can agree with a really rich person on a lot of stuff. And that can be stuff that lots of people agree on, or it can be very esoteric, or you can be really good on the internet and raise money via small dollar donors. I think that's certainly as a Democrat, I think more Democrats are raising money via small dollar donors and competing that way. But I don't think that there's a one-to-one between like good at the internet and good at governing. And that's the system that we have right now. Those things can go together, but they don't have to. So I think that, again, as you pointed out, Rick, we did not have like anything approaching a perfect system post Watergate to Citizens United. Now we have kind of this apocalyptic wasteland of a system, and new things are emerging, but they're not helpful, right? The things that no one would design a country this way. Let's just put it that way.
What do you see as the biggest threats, David? What should people be
So
looking
the
out
biggest
for?
threats. Well, I think whether it's good or bad, I think people are looking out for, the threats to the campaign finance system, or the threats posed by the lack of a campaign finance system, have become really obvious. The thing that I would say is a lot of people do confuse cause and effect. And so just to give you an example, let's say, and I'm going to pick a fringe idea totally at random here. Let's say I'm a big believer in QAnon, and I want to get my elected officials to start to follow my belief system. There's two ways to do it. And the one way would be to go to people and say, I will give you campaign donations if you agree to, talk about how great QAnon is. That is not how that happens most of the time. That's kind of like the classic, it's almost a bribery model. It's now essentially legal. You can still mess it up, right? Trump managed to break a campaign finance law, probably. But that's very hard to do. It's also very rare because it's not necessary. Instead, what I would do if I was a radical rich person is find someone, say Marjorie Taylor Greene, who already believes in QAnon, and then I would donate to their campaign and instantly make them a viable candidate. So it's less that, people who are wise are being corrupted by the system, and more that unwise people are being elevated to a status they don't deserve just because they happen to share the opinions of someone who's super rich. So understanding how that corruption works, it's not better, it's just different. And understanding how it's different helps us figure out how we change it.
It's
Exactly.
a lot.
That's a great point, David.
Yeah, it's such a tangled web, and I think the more transparency, the more we expose it, and the more that people know where to look to pay attention to this, the better it is, because they've been able to really get away with the money and politics part of this. They've been able to get away with this because the average person does not pay attention to it. They're not like Judd or the rest of us who like to go through quarterly filings of, and open secrets and all those things. I don't have time for that. So that's why we're here to continue to inform. Let's take a tweet real quick while we still have Rick. Okay, I've been a strong advocate of getting money out of politics since Citizens United. However, I'm wondering if corporate money may save us from the extremists that dominate the political realm. USA companies like stability. Your thoughts? What do you say to that, David?
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, what I would say is, first of all, my general view is, even if you don't like the rules, you have to play by them. So super PACs, I think, are an excellent example for me, right? I don't think that super PACs are a good way of setting up the campaign finance system. I think super PACs like the Lincoln Project, as long as we have the campaign finance system we've got, I want them doing things that I think are good. And I hope that, eventually down the road, we can reform the campaign finance system so that everybody has a more equal say in our government. And I think that's true with corporate money, right? As long as people are donating, if corporations are donating, I would like them to be donating to candidates who I believe are going to protect our democracy over candidates who are not. All that said, I think one misconception is the amount of money that corporations spend via their PACs versus the amount of money that just rich individuals spend on politics is really different. So to me, a huge part of the value of corporate speech when it comes to politics, if corporations want to take a stand for our democracy, is that corporations help define what the center is or what a reasonable position is for a lot of mainstream media. And if the Chamber of Commerce comes out and says, as they did to their credit, we should have elections. The winners of those elections should get to take office. Pretty basic stuff. That helps anchor what is the center position that the media then kind of reacts off of it. And then that trickles down to voters. So I think that business can continue to have a lot of influence in politics and in government, whether or not they're spending that money. Just by being public about what their values are, and also the fact that democracy is good for business, I think those things matter a lot. And I think the other, just the flip side of that is, if politicians start relying on corporate money and corporations can give unlimited money, the politicians can start shaking down the corporations. So you could end up with a system where it flips, and politicians can then go to corporations and say, okay, if you don't want to be investigated by my Department of Justice, you have to keep quiet about these issues, or you have to give money to me, and so on. And that's what we had pre-Watergate. That's what Nixon did. It's certainly what happened, back in the late 1800s. So I'm less worried about corporations not being allowed to spend money on politics.
So, David, I'm glad you got a quick reference into the 1800s because I know you're very excited. You get very excited about 1800s campaign fundraising operations. But before you can explain why, we have to say goodnight to the Rick Wilson because he has a hard
Thanks, everybody.
out. We will see you on Tuesday, my friend.
All right, everybody. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, David, please explain briefly why you get excited about campaign fundraising in the 1800s.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is a whole long thing, most of which I think most people watching will find boring. So I'm going to do the short version. I think in a lot of ways we are reliving the 1890s political process. And part of that, in the late 1800s, you had what was called a squeeze bill. So this was in like state legislatures. People would kind of knock on your door if you ran a business, and they would say, hey, it's election season. And by the way, we're about to regulate the heck out of your industry in all these terrible ways. And, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, if you happen to give us a campaign donation, maybe that bill that we have on the floor will go away. And that was how they funded campaigns, was by essentially extorting businesses. So I actually think that is a really important point for today. I think most people watching, Lincoln Project TV are concerned about money in politics from the sense of what it does to our government. But it's also really bad for business. When you have politicians who can extort business, who can skew the market just in order to get campaign contributions, that also distorts the free market. So if you're a hardcore capitalist, you don't want this either. And I think that's an important thing that a lot of people don't realize, is that it's not just having, corporate money in politics is not just bad for the rest of us. It can also be bad for corporations. No one really wins in the end from the system.
Yeah, that it's amazing how, history repeats itself. It's I was unaware of that. I didn't know about that little piece of 1890s campaign fundraising history, and that's interesting because we need to make sure that we're aware of that so we don't let that happen again, because it just seems like there always seems to be a way that big money finds its way into politics, no matter what we do, what we pass, what court cases say this or that about it. There's always a way. Money is like water. It always seems to carve a way through somehow. But the more people pay attention, the more we can hold them accountable for it. Before I let you go tonight, I wanted to ask you about the piece that you wrote in The Guardian, where you say that Republicans will try to create an ethics trap for Democrats. Don't fall for it. What were you talking about?
So what I was talking about was what looks like the return of norms now that Joe Biden is president, and how that's actually an illusion. The specific example I was using is, Trump was, as we all know, an ethical nightmare, and that's being nice to nightmares. Now Joe Biden is president. He is saying that his employees have to sign an ethics waiver. They can't, I don't know all the details, but essentially they can't. If you're a lobbyist, it's very, very difficult, close to impossible to come into the administration. Once you leave the administration, you can't turn around and lobby your former colleagues. And this is really important. He's also cracking down on something called shadow lobbying. So you can't join a law firm and not technically be a lobbyist, but you help the lobbyists lobby. You can't do any of that. And that's good. And I think it's a good thing that the Biden White House and other administration employees are going to have ethical standards. But because this is now just an executive order and it's a set of one-party norms, it's not that the norm has come back, because you only have one party that adheres to it. So the moment, a Ted Cruz or a Josh Hawley or someone like that takes office, they're going to immediately shred that ethics pledge. And so it's very important that we recognize that if only one party believes in the rule of law, believes in ethics, worries about, an independent Justice Department, things like that, that doesn't mean that all the norms are coming back and everything is, coming up roses again. What it means is we need to figure out a way to codify some of these norms into law so that they apply to everybody. And that's what I think is really important. We can't, get complacent just because things suddenly seem like maybe they're going back to what we used to say was normal.
So what do you think we should do? What should Congress pass another law? There was the whole 5-year, you can't lobby for 5 years if you were in an executive position in the White House or a member of Congress. There were all these things, but there were ways around that. You just didn't register as a lobbyist. You still worked for the consulting firm and you were a consultant and not a lobbyist. I mean, these things, there's ways around them. I mean, the Trump administration, like you said, they were one of the most, if not the most unethical administration in the history of this country. And they said, no, we're not going to hire lobbyists. And then they hired a shit ton of lobbyists. So,
Yeah.
what do you do?
So I think, yes, you can generally work really hard to find your way around laws, but it's a lot easier to find your way around the laws if the laws don't exist in the first place. So a good place to start, Elizabeth Warren has a bill on this, and she's put it forward, I believe, a couple of Congresses in a row, that would basically take the meat of these ethics pledges, apply them not just to the executive branch, but to Congress, strengthen them a little bit, and then because it would be law, it can't just be undone by a future president. So it would apply equally to everybody. I think that's a really good place to start. And I think if you look at what the Biden team is doing, and I don't know whether this is part of the Warren bill, but they are thinking creatively about how do we not just crack down on, the revolving door where someone leaves, the administration, and then the next day they're lobbying their former colleagues, but also how do we make sure that they don't do what you just described, right? Go to the consulting firm. They don't have to register as a lobbyist, but they can kind of, they can help out the lobbyists and do that kind of thing. So there are always going to be this cat and mouse game between people exploiting loopholes, people closing the loopholes. But I don't know who the let's assume the reformers, the cats, they need to continue their work. It's not a reason not to do anything. It's a reason to keep doing more stuff and to recognize it's never going to be done. You always have to be vigilant about this sort of thing.
Yes, indeed. As my grandfather would always tell me, pay attention. That's how you hold people accountable. You pay attention, then you can hold them accountable because you know what's going on. David Litt, thank you so much. Be sure to check out his book, Democracy in One Book or Less. It's actually a great read, very funny, lots of relatable anecdotes there, particularly about Disney World and voting. So check that out. And also check out his website where you can also see lots of pictures of his adorable cats, which I am here for. And so is Tiki. Tiki appreciates that. David Litt, thank you so much.
Great to talk to you again. Bye.
He's a lot of fun. So before we go tonight, speaking of fun, Donald Trump had a meltdown earlier where because he was getting threatened to get kicked out of the union for SAG-AFTRA. That's for actors or people who are in the industry, in the news media. It's the union. And the union was basically like, we're over you, Donald Trump, after January 6th because of everything that he's been involved with. And they were kicking him out of the union. And he tried to do it. No, you can't fire me. I quit. And he sent this typical letter that's, a Donald Trump letter where he told them about what jerks they are, and then also talked about his wonderful work that he's done, his breadth of work in television, and that he doesn't need them anyway. They haven't done anything for him. And we want to remind folks of Donald Trump's Emmy award-winning work in film and TV.
Excuse me, where's the lobby?
Down the hall and to the left.
Thanks. I'm gonna win this race.
Waldo, you're the best son money can buy.
Look, without Derek Zoolander, male modeling wouldn't be what it is today.
Has anyone ever told you that you'd look great, really great, in a comb over?
That's literally everything he's been in film. And then, of course, the greatest show ever on television, The Apprentice, where he never won an Emmy, and he should have. And he's still very, very upset about that. So he has said sayonara to SAG-AFTRA. But, we would be remiss if we didn't remind you of all of the wonderful works of art from the Donald Trump. This guy. Well, our call to action tonight is to check out our new show. We have another new show that we are adding to the Lincoln Project TV network here. It is called The Lincoln Report, and it will air this Monday. And the show is hosted by the wonderful Naira Haq. Our team has been working really, really hard on this to bring it to you guys. It's a different look and feel from what you've seen here, and we encourage you to check it out on Monday. And I believe that we have the promo. Did we put it up? Yes, we did. Okay, great. Let's put it up one more time. Monday, the Lincoln Report. There it is. That you can follow it. You can watch it here the same way you watch our show Monday at 8 p.m. It's going to be on Monday and Wednesdays. Yeah, check it out. Let us know what you think. Ask questions. I think it's Ask Lincoln Report, just like Ask the Breakdown. So you guys can ask questions of Naira also. So we're looking forward to that, and we will welcome Naira. You'll get to see her on our show next week too. She'll come talk to us. You'll get to know her as well. And that is it for us. We will be back on Tuesday. We also have a relaunch of the Lincoln Project podcast. The new season has started. It's called Lincoln Project 2.0. Be sure to resubscribe to it. If you have not done that yet, please do resubscribe to the Lincoln Project podcast. It's called Lincoln Project 2.0. And in this episode, Steve Schmidt talks about how democracy was poisoned. So everybody loves Steve Schmidt. Check it out. Here's a clip. We'll see you guys on Tuesday.
Over the months of November and December in particular, American democracy was poisoned. I mean, you could do a Chernobyl-style HBO movie about democracy being irradiated, being poisoned, like the BP Deepwater Horizon spill that devastated the Gulf waters. Day by day, lie by lie, accumulating to the insurrection. And so we should be able to see the fault lines, that Liz Cheney is the conservative leader of a Republican Democracy Caucus, and Matt Gaetz is a senior lieutenant to Kevin McCarthy in a pro-autocracy, Trumpist, fascist caucus.
Lincoln Project presents a message for Marjorie Taylor Greene from Senator Mitch McConnell, somebody who suggested that perhaps no airplane hit the Pentagon on 9/11, that horrifying school shootings were pre-staged, and that the Clintons crashed JFK Jr.'s airplane is not living in reality. But Marge, that's not all. Mitch also said that your loony lies and conspiracy theories are a cancer for the Republican Party. Ouch.
These are uncertain times. Now more than ever, you want to have confidence that your investments are sound. You may have been wondering, what's going on with today's Republican Party? I just don't understand some of the moves they're making. Will my own brand's reputation be tarnished by some of the crazy things some members have been saying? No. We want you to know the GOP is a big tent, and while Liz Cheney is one seat in the back, the majority still stands by the values and priorities you've invested in all these years. Voter suppression, white supremacy, conservative judges, the elimination of all snake people pedophiles, tax cuts, and an end to the Jewish laser. Above all, the GOP stands for the return of God King Donald J. Trump to his throne and the toppling of rank democracy. Glory-soaked names like Hawley, Cruz, Gohmert, Boebert, Gaetz, and Taylor Greene are emblazoned at the center of today's dazzling Republican Valhalla. They embody today's Republican values, your values. With your continued investment, you'll help ensure they stay Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy values too. But we can only do it with your support.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Just watching my algorithms get crushed. I guess I did something to piss off the Instagram gods, so hopefully you're seeing this stuff anyway. We'll do what we can. Talk to you soon.